So I remember the first letter that I realized had value. Wasn't A or B or C, although those are important, and we're going to talk about those. It was S. So if you think back to pre-K, first grade, kindergarten, S stood for satisfactory on your grade cards, right? I loved to be satisfactory. I craved it. Loved it. Hated to be unsatisfactory. I was unsatisfactory always in math, handwriting, still am, right? But I loved to be satisfactory because I knew with every satisfactory grade that Mama would give me $1 value, right? Here's the reality, though. Our life is made up of letters that constitute some semblance of value to us. So you learned letters to read, write, and speak. And unfortunately, we have values of letters that are ascribed to us as individuals, in our workplaces especially. I'm talking most specifically about generational letters, so X, Y, and Z. Now, take me, for instance, I'm a millennial, a member of Generation Y, and this is not a woe is me speech, although that would be very millennial of me, right? But I have been stereotyped, I've been typecast, my friends have been as well, but if you think about it, you have been too. Boomers, you are professionally competitive. You are career loyalists. You're a wealthy consumer base. Unfortunately, you had no balance. You would work 80, sometimes 90-hour weeks, and your X and Y kids looked at you and said, well, you don't want that, right? Generation X, you're autonomous, you're independent, but you're cynical. And sadly, sometimes too quiet and often forgotten. Generation Y, millennials, we are entitled, perfectionist, apathetic, right? All traits that tend to bug our boomer and X bosses. And then Generation Z, you're entrepreneurial, tech savvy. And we recognize, though, that this tech savviness may lend itself to a little bit of instability. But all of these are stereotypes, right? So how do we rise above? I always tell my students, you are worth more than a grade. You have an inherent value, a dignity. How dare me take that and ascribe that in a box, right? And define you according to that particular letter. But unfortunately, we do it all the time. So I want to argue today, or at least position today, what I'm calling generational agnosticism in our workplaces. Basically, that we look at people as individuals who are competent and capable on their own without ascribing these generational identifiers to them even before they step foot into their workplaces that may or may not fit. So I want to just kind of take you back. As we look at job data over time, and I'm talking decades worth of job data, workers have always pretty much wanted the same thing. We wanted balance, right? We wanted to know that we don't have to work 7 days a week for 15 hours a day. We want fair compensation, although fair is kind of defined differently depending on who you talk to. For the most part, workers will say, at least they have over the last several decades, that they want to be challenged, that they don't want to be bored when they go into their workplaces, and then ultimately they want to be recognized. They want to know that at the end of the day, they're getting a pat or a back, a promotion, or some form of recognition for a job well done. It's not rocket science, right? So several years ago, Peter Drucker supposedly said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I want to share with you just a couple ways that you, hopefully, can become a generation agnostic employee and how your workplaces can become generation agnostic work environments. So first, let's talk about what it means to be a generation agnostic employee. And you've heard some of these before, but I think it's good to remind ourselves as we live in the midst of all of these identifiers and generational differences that there really is nothing new under the sun, right? So first, work hard. This will never go out of vogue. It will always separate and distinguish. And we forget that often, that at the end of the day, work ethic counts. And it counts towards our merit and our worth in our organizations. Number two, work smart. So what I mean by this is that we should strive not to be problem finders or problem complainers, but instead to be problem solvers. And at the end of the day, nobody is indispensable, but some people are harder to replace than others, right? And number three, we want to make sure that we're working relationally. And this is something that transcends generational differences. It doesn't matter what age you are. You can be kind. You can be compassionate. You can treat others the way you would want to be treated. Working relationally allows us to look at people not just as a generation, right, and ascribe those stereotypes to them, but it allows us to look at them as individuals with an inherent value, a dignity. So those are 3 things you can do to be a generation agnostic employee. So what about being a generation agnostic workplace? Because this is actually a little bit harder. So I harken back to Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It really does. So number 1, can you establish a culture where your people are able to buy into the mission and vision, where they're able to latch onto that, to hear what you say and be a part of something bigger than themselves? It's a big deal, right? Number 2, we want to make sure that we're establishing fair conditions that are equitable, that are balanced, that allow for mobility. We don't necessarily need to cater to a particular age group or generation. We just need to make sure that whatever we have created has some semblance of equitable structure. And number 3, we want to make sure that we have established some semblance of clarity. Again, being able to look at people and say, this is what I expect of you. That doesn't necessarily have to be a millennial trait. We always say we have these grand expectations of clarity. I would argue everyone wants to know what they're supposed to do, right? And clarity, again, transcends generational differences. It allows employees to meet and then exceed expectations. So in sum, as we think about what it means to be generation agnostic, it means we don't necessarily latch on to generational identifiers. We don't necessarily sit there and allow them to define us, and we don't cater as an organization to a particular age group. But instead, as employees, we work hard, we work smart, we work relationally as workplaces. We establish a culture that people can buy into, that they believe in, right? We establish conditions that are fair, and we establish some semblance of clarity of expectation. You know, at the end of the day, we need to rise above generational stereotypes and engage beyond age. Your life is made up of letters, but your identity does not have to be defined by them. Thank you.